Hello, Night Seekers, and welcome to Lacuna Noir. This is where forgotten stories and gentle voices meet, carrying you softly into peaceful sleep, wrapped in mystery. Before tonight's stories begin, I'd love to know, where in the world are you listening from? Drop a comment below and let me know. And a little note before we begin. You may notice a few brief ads in the first 10 minutes, but after that, the rest of the video is completely ad-free. Just you, the silence, and the stories. So settle in, get comfortable, and let the night carry you. If you're drawn to these quiet, shadowed nights, don't forget to like, subscribe, and tap the bell so you never miss a story when darkness calls. When I was younger, I was somewhat religious, but not in the way where I was seriously committed to going to church every week. I believed in God, or at least I believed enough that certain things still got to me, but I did not really care enough to make church a regular part of my life. It was not that I hated church or had some big argument against it. I just did not go much. Life was busy, I was lazy about it, and if I am honest, I did not feel like dealing with the guilt or the routine that came with it. I was one of those people who still had religion somewhere in the back of my mind, but I was not living like it was a priority. That is why the dream felt so strange. In the dream, I was at a church. It was supposed to be a church I went to often, or at least that is how the dream made it feel. Dreams do that weird thing where they tell you something is familiar even when it is not. You can be standing in a place you have never seen in real life, but inside the dream you somehow know, this is my house, or this is my school, or this is the church I always go to. It does not have to make sense. Your dream just gives you that feeling, and while you are in it, you accept it completely. That was how this church felt. It did not matter that in real life, I did not have a church I went to often. In the dream, I believed I was in a familiar church. It felt like a place I was supposed to know, a place where people might recognize me and expect something from me. There were pews, open space, and that quiet church feeling that can be peaceful or uncomfortable depending on what is going on inside you. In my case, it felt uncomfortable because I knew I had not been showing up. Across the room, I saw the preacher. Again, in real life, I did not have a preacher. There was no specific man in my life who filled that role. But in the dream, he was my preacher. I knew it the same way I knew the church was supposed to be familiar. He was standing across the room wearing a black and white suit, and when I saw him, my first thought was not happiness or comfort. It was dread. I thought, I better not let him see me because he'll chew me out for not being at church lately. That thought felt completely natural in the dream. I was not thinking about how I did not actually have a preacher. I was not questioning why I was in that church or how I had gotten there. I was just worried that this man would notice me and call me out. I felt like a kid trying to avoid a teacher after skipping class. There was guilt in it, but also irritation. I did not want to be lectured. I did not want to explain myself. I wanted to avoid him and slip away before he could ask where I had been, but he saw me. The second he noticed me, I knew I could not ignore him. That is another strange dream feeling, where you understand the rules even if nobody explains them. I knew I had to walk over. I knew he expected me to come to him. So, I started making my way across the room. As I walked toward him, he began to change. At first, it was subtle enough that my mind almost tried to keep the original image in place. He had been wearing a black and white suit, the kind of outfit you might expect a preacher to wear in a dream. But as I got closer, the suit changed. The black and white shifted into black with a red undershirt. That red stood out immediately. It was not a soft red or a normal little detail. It felt sharp, almost wrong, like the dream had suddenly turned the color up. Then his face changed. His skin went from pale to tan. His hair changed from black to blonde. It was not like watching someone put on a disguise. It was more like his whole appearance was being rewritten while I was walking toward him. The closer I got, the less he looked like the preacher I had first seen across the room. He was still standing there, waiting for me, still acting like he knew me, but his body and face were changing into someone else. The teeth were the worst part. At first, his teeth were normal, good teeth, but as he changed, they became yellow and nasty. They looked wrong in a way that made my stomach tighten. Teeth can be deeply unsettling in dreams when they change like that. A face can become different, clothes can shift, hair can change color, but when the teeth turn dirty and rotten looking, it gives the whole person a cruel, sick feeling. It was like whatever he really was started showing through the preacher shape. By the time I reached him, he did not feel like a preacher anymore. Not really. He still had the role of one in the dream, and he still spoke to me like he had authority, but the feeling around him had changed. He felt darker, meaner, like he was not there to guide me, but to accuse me. He looked at me and said, "Where you been at?" Hearing my name in the dream made it feel personal. It was not some random scary figure speaking generally. He knew me. He knew I had not been going to church. He knew exactly where to press. I felt caught, like there was no way to lie well enough to get out of it. But I tried anyway. I gave him a crappy excuse about being too busy with work. It was the kind of excuse people give when they know the truth is not good enough. I was too busy. Work had been crazy. I meant to come back. I had things going on. Whatever I said, it was weak. And even in the dream, I knew it was weak. He knew it too. He did not react like he believed me. He just looked at me with that changed face, that red undershirt, that nasty mouth, and said something I will never forget. He said, "Son, do you know you could be eating dinner in hell by 10 o'clock? That line hit me hard. It was not just the words. It was the casual way he said them, like he was not trying to scare me with some dramatic sermon. It sounded more like a warning, or maybe a threat. Eating dinner in hell by 10 o'clock is such a strange phrase that it stuck immediately. It was specific, too. Not someday. Not eventually. Not when you die years from now. By 10 o'clock. It gave the dream a deadline, and that made it much creepier. I did not know what to say. In the dream, I just said something like, yeah. It was the answer of someone who wanted the conversation to end. I was not arguing. I was not asking questions. I was just agreeing because I felt cornered and uncomfortable. I wanted to get away from him. I wanted the dream to move on. I wanted not to be standing in front of this preacher who had turned into something else while talking about hell like it was waiting for me that same night. Then I woke up. When I woke up, the dream was still fresh in my mind. It had that heavy feeling some dreams have when they follow you into the room. I was awake, but emotionally I was still standing in that church, still hearing him say I could be eating dinner in hell by 10 o'clock. I do not remember if I checked the time right away, but I know the line stayed with me. It was too specific to vanish like a normal dream. I got up and went to the bathroom. While I was in there, my mom knocked on the bathroom door. That alone was normal enough, but what she said was not normal for her. She told me she had left me some gas station chicken strips and potato logs on my bedroom bookshelf. That was strange because she never did that. It was not something she regularly brought me. It was not some normal routine where she left food in my room. And because of the dream, the word dinner immediately came back into my mind. In the dream, the preacher had said I could be eating dinner in hell by 10 o'clock. Now, my mom was telling me she had left food for me in my room, chicken strips and potato logs from a gas station, a weird little meal sitting there waiting for me. At first, it was probably just an odd coincidence, but it made me feel uneasy. I got out of the bathroom and went back to my room. The food was there, just like she said. I sat down to eat it. I turned on the TV, or rather flipped it back on, because I had apparently left it on the History Channel. I was not expecting anything. I was not trying to connect the dream to the TV. I was just sitting there with my gas station food, still thinking about how strange the dream had been. Then, I looked at the screen. There was an Antichrist special playing on the History Channel. I looked at the time. It was 10:08. That was the moment everything felt too weird. In the dream, the preacher had told me I could be eating dinner in hell by 10 o'clock. I woke up, went to the bathroom, and my mom told me she had left me food, which she never did. I went back to my room, sat down to eat, and the TV was on a program about the Antichrist. The time was just after 10 o'clock. It was not exactly 10:00, but close enough that it made the dream feel like it had spilled into real life. I remember sitting there with the food, staring at the television, feeling that strange, cold coincidence settle over me. It was not like something supernatural exploded into the room. There was no shadow in the corner, no voice, no lights flickering. It was just the pieces lining up in a way that felt wrong. A dream about a preacher changing into something nasty and warning me about hell by 10. Food waiting for me unexpectedly. A show about the Antichrist on the TV. 10:08 on the clock. It was weirdly coincidental. Maybe that is all it was. A coincidence. Dreams are random, and TV schedules are random, and my mom happened to bring me food that morning. Maybe my brain connected everything because the dream had already put me in a religious, fearful mindset. If I had not had that dream, I might have just eaten the food and barely noticed what was on the History Channel. If I had not looked at the time, I might not have thought about the 10 o'clock line. It is possible that the whole thing only felt meaningful because my mind was already primed to see meaning. But even knowing that, it felt strange. The part that still bothers me most is how specific the dream line was. Eating dinner in hell by 10 o'clock. Not just going to hell, not just you need to come back to church, not just some generic warning. Eating dinner. 10 o'clock. Then I wake up and there is food waiting for me. Food my mom never usually left like that. And I end up eating it just after 10 while a religious doom-style program is playing on the TV I had left on. That is the kind of coincidence that makes you stop mid-bite and think, okay, what the hell is this? It also bothered me that the preacher in the dream was not really a preacher. He started as one, or at least as what my mind labeled as one, but then he changed. His clothes changed, his skin changed, his hair changed, and his teeth became gross and yellow. It felt like the dream was showing me something pretending to be religious authority, but turning into something darker as I got closer. That made the Antichrist special feel even more uncomfortable afterward, because the whole idea of something false or evil wearing a holy-looking disguise was already sitting in my mind. I am not saying the dream was a prophecy. I am not saying I was visited by the devil or warned by God. I do not know what I believe about it now. But at that time, when I was somewhat religious but not really practicing, it felt like something had grabbed me by the collar and said, pay attention. Maybe it was just guilt. Maybe because I had religious beliefs in the background, my brain used church imagery to scare me. Maybe the preacher was my own guilt changing into something ugly. Maybe the 10 o'clock dinner line was just a strange phrase my sleeping brain created. But then, the morning happened. That is what made it stick. A dream by itself can be dismissed. A weird TV show by itself can be dismissed. My mom leaving food by itself can be dismissed. The time being 10:08 by itself can be dismissed. But all of them together, right after that dream, felt like too much. It was like every part of the morning echoed one part of the dream. Even the food was weird. Gas station chicken strips and potato logs are not exactly a normal symbolic meal, but in that moment they felt tied to the dream because of the word dinner. It was such an ordinary, almost funny detail, and that made the whole thing even stranger. If my mom had left me some serious home-cooked meal, maybe it would have felt more dramatic. Instead, it was gas station food, sitting on my bedroom bookshelf. That almost made it more believable as a real event, because dreams and strange coincidences often come wrapped in the most ordinary, ridiculous details. I ate while watching the Antichrist special, but I do not think I enjoyed that meal very much. How could I? I had just dreamed that a preacher thing told me I could be eating dinner in hell by 10 o'clock, and now I was eating after 10 while the TV talked about the Antichrist. Every bite probably felt like part of the joke, or the warning, or whatever it was. I was not in hell, obviously, but the connection was close enough to make me deeply uncomfortable. I kept thinking about the phrase, "Son, do you know you could be eating dinner in hell by 10 o'clock?" There was something almost southern or old-fashioned about the way it was worded. It sounded like something a preacher might say in a sermon, but also like something a demon might say while pretending to be one. The word son made it feel personal and authoritative. The 10 o'clock made it feel immediate. The eating dinner in hell made it feel strangely casual, like damnation was not some distant religious concept, but a dinner plan I could be late for. That is what made the dream creepy. It took something huge and terrifying and made it sound like an appointment. Looking back, I can explain parts of it. I was religious enough to feel guilty about not going to church. My brain created a church and a preacher because that was the shape of the guilt. The preacher turned ugly because guilt and fear can distort authority figures in dreams. The TV happened to be on the History Channel because I had left it there. The Antichrist special happened to be playing because that channel airs religious and historical programs like that. My mom happened to bring food because maybe she was being nice or had extra. The time happened to be close to 10 because mornings move the way they move. All of that is possible. But the experience still felt weird. Sometimes a rational explanation does not completely erase the feeling of a coincidence. You can list every normal piece and still feel like the pieces lined up too neatly. That is how this was. Nothing impossible happened. Nobody vanished. No object moved by itself. No voice spoke after I woke up. But the dream and the morning connected so closely that it left me with a feeling I could not shake. It was not exactly terrifying, but it was unsettling. It made me think about religion, guilt, death, and the strange way dreams can sometimes seem to reach into real life. Maybe the dream made me notice things I would have ignored. Maybe the morning was just a pile of random events my brain turned into a pattern. Or maybe there are moments when something, whether inside us or outside us, uses coincidence to get our attention. I do not know. I only know that I dreamed I was in a church I did not really go to, talking to a preacher I did not really have. He changed as I walked toward him, from a normal-looking man into someone with a black outfit, red undershirt, tan face, blonde hair, and nasty yellow teeth. He asked where I had been, and when I gave a weak excuse about being busy with work, he told me I could be eating dinner in hell by 10 o'clock. Then I woke up, went to the bathroom, and my mom told me she had left me food in my room. Something she never did. I sat down to eat it, turned on the TV, and found an Antichrist special playing on the History Channel. The time was 10:08. Maybe it was all just coincidence. But it was one of those coincidences that felt a little too perfectly aimed at me. When I was around 20 years old, I was still living in my parents' basement. At the time, I did not think much about it. Plenty of people stay with their parents longer than they planned, especially when money is tight or life is still taking shape. The basement had become my space. It was not perfect, but it was mine. I had my bed, my things, a bedside lamp, and enough privacy that it felt separate from the rest of the house. The basement had the usual basement feeling, especially at night. During the day, it was normal. Light came in where it could, and there were always ordinary noises from upstairs, people walking around, cabinets opening, the television on, doors shutting, pipes running. It felt like part of the house. But late at night, when everyone upstairs was asleep, the basement became much quieter. You could hear the house settling. You could hear the low hum of appliances or the furnace. You could hear pipes clicking sometimes, or water moving somewhere behind the walls. There were corners where the light did not reach well, and the ceiling was low enough in places that it made the whole space feel enclosed. None of that usually bothered me. I had lived there long enough to know the sounds. More importantly, we had 2 dogs at the time, and I always tried to have one of them sleep in my room with me. I liked having a dog nearby at night. Sometimes one would sleep on my bed. Sometimes one would settle on the floor beside it. Sometimes they would wander in and out, changing their mind halfway through the night. But I always preferred having one there. Dogs make a room feel less empty. They sigh, shift around, breathe loudly, lick their paws, scratch at the blanket, or move when you move, even when they are asleep. There is something comforting about knowing another living thing is nearby. And I had always believed dogs were good at noticing things people did not. Not necessarily ghosts, exactly. I was not someone who went around insisting every strange feeling meant there was something supernatural in the house. But I had always thought that if ghosts existed, animals might notice them before people did. Dogs react to things that humans cannot hear or smell. They stop suddenly and stare at empty corners. They bark at sounds you do not notice. They seem to understand the world through senses we barely think about. So whenever one of the dogs became alert for no obvious reason, I noticed. Usually, there was an explanation. A squirrel outside. Someone walking upstairs. A car door shutting down the street. The furnace turning on. A distant sound that had traveled through the walls. But one night, there was no explanation that I could find. It was late. I had already gotten ready for bed. I was sitting or lying on my bed with the bedside lamp still on, probably scrolling through my phone or doing whatever people do in those final few minutes before they finally turn off the light. One of the dogs was beside me. I do not remember which dog it was now, but I remember the feeling of having it there. It had been calm, relaxed, maybe half asleep, maybe resting with its head down, completely comfortable in the room. Nothing strange had happened. The basement was quiet. The room was familiar. I was just about to turn off the bedside lamp. Then the dog suddenly got up, not lazily. Not in the normal way a dog gets up because it wants water, needs to stretch, or has decided it is going to sleep somewhere else. It snapped awake. Its whole body changed. 1 second it was beside me. The next it ran across the room. It moved quickly enough that I noticed immediately. It crossed to the far side of the room, stopped, sat down, and stared behind me. Not at me, behind me. At first, I did not turn around. I just watched the dog. There is a look animals get when they are interested in something. Their ears lift, their head tilts, their tail may move. They looked curious. This was not that. The dog looked scared. Focused still, it sat there staring past me as though someone was standing directly behind my bed. I remember feeling something happen in my chest immediately. My heart started beating hard. Not because I had seen anything. I had not. Not because I heard a noise. I did not. But because the dog's face told me that whatever it was looking at did not feel normal. I have seen dogs look frightened before. They can look nervous during thunderstorms. They can look worried when strangers come into the house. They can get tense around other dogs, loud noises, or unfamiliar places. But this was different. The dog was not barking. It was not growling. It was not running toward the door. It was just sitting there, frozen, staring behind me. And I was sitting on the bed with my back to whatever it was staring at. For a few seconds, I did nothing. I could feel my heart smashing against my chest. Every instinct in me wanted to turn around as fast as possible. Another part of me did not want to turn around at all. It felt like one of those moments where you are afraid that if you look, you will confirm something you cannot deal with. But I had always had a strange personal belief about things like ghosts. I thought that if there were ghosts, or spirits, or whatever you wanted to call them, they probably did not appreciate people screaming, running away, and treating them like they were automatically evil. That might sound silly, especially in the middle of the night when a dog is staring at an empty place behind you. But it was genuinely how I thought about it. I figured that if something was there, panicking would not help. And if nothing was there, panicking would only make me feel stupid. So I tried to stay calm. Or at least I tried to look calm. I turned around. I do not remember seeing a figure. I do not remember seeing a shadow move across the wall. I do not remember anything standing in the room. The room looked empty. There was my bedside lamp casting warm light across the walls. There were my things where they belonged. The corner of the room was dark. In the normal way, corners are dark when only one lamp is on. Nothing seemed different. But the dog was still staring, still watching the space behind me, still looking terrified. That was the part I could not ignore. The dog was not reacting to the room the way I saw it. It was reacting to something else, or at least that was how it felt. I looked around as normally as I could. I did not leap off the bed. I did not scream. I did not grab a weapon or run upstairs. I tried to act like I was talking to a person who had walked in without knocking. I said something as welcoming as I could manage. Something like, "Hey, nice to meet you," but I was just going to sleep. I remember trying to keep my voice steady. That was difficult. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. My hands probably felt cold. I was trying to speak casually while every part of me wanted to get out of the room. But I kept going. I said something like, "If you want to say hi to me or the dog tomorrow, that would be fine. But right now, I would really appreciate some privacy." That was it, a polite boundary, as if I were talking to a roommate, as if this was a completely normal situation, as if there was not an animal across the room staring at something just behind me with an expression I had never wanted to see on a dog. I do not remember whether anything happened immediately after I said it. I do not remember a sound. I do not remember the room getting colder. I do not remember a door moving. I do not remember the dog suddenly relaxing. That is one of the strangest parts of the memory. The event is clear in certain pieces, but the ending is blurred. I remember the dog rising from beside me. I remember it running across the room. I remember it sitting and staring past me. I remember the fear on its face. I remember turning around. I remember speaking into the empty space. But I do not remember whether the dog stayed in my room that night. I do not remember if it eventually climbed back onto the bed. I do not remember if it left. I do not remember whether I fell asleep with the lamp on or turned it off eventually. All I remember is that horrifying feeling in my chest, my heart beating so hard it felt like it was trying to escape, and the look on the dog's face. That look stayed with me, because I could tell myself I had imagined something. I could tell myself I was tired. I could tell myself that the shadows in the basement had gotten into my head. But the dog had reacted first. I had been calm before it moved. I had not been telling ghost stories. I had not heard a strange sound. I had not been watching a horror movie. The dog was relaxed beside me, then suddenly ran across the room and stared at something behind me. That was the part I could never fully explain. Later, I tried to think of normal reasons. Maybe it heard something in the wall. Basements have plenty of strange sounds. A mouse could have been moving behind the drywall. The furnace could have shifted. Water could have moved through a pipe. Something upstairs could have made a sound that traveled through the floor in a strange way. Dogs can hear things people cannot. Maybe there was a noise behind me that I never noticed. Maybe it smelled something. Dogs can smell animals, insects, mold, old food, strangers, and things human beings barely register. Maybe a mouse had moved behind the wall. Maybe another animal had been outside near a basement window. Maybe the dog caught a scent that made it uncomfortable. That would be the sensible explanation. But even then, the reaction still felt extreme. The dog did not pace around sniffing. It did not bark at the wall. It did not go toward the corner to investigate. It ran away from where it had been sitting beside me, crossed the room, and stared back at something behind me. It looked like it wanted distance. That is what scared me. It was not curious. It was cautious, almost afraid. I have wondered whether I was projecting my own fear onto the dog's expression. Maybe the dog only looked serious or alert, and because I had become scared, I remembered it as terrified. Maybe the whole thing became bigger in my memory over time. That is possible. Memory changes. Fear changes memory. You remember the sharpest part of an event, then your mind fills the gaps around it. But I still remember the dog's posture. The way it sat, the way its body was still, the way its eyes were focused past me. It did not look like a dog hearing something upstairs. It looked like a dog watching someone stand behind my bed. I did not tell many people about it afterward. It sounded too strange. Hey, my dog stared at something invisible in my basement, so I politely asked it to leave me alone. That is not exactly the kind of story you tell casually. People either laugh, make a joke, or assume you are trying to sound dramatic. And I was not trying to sound dramatic. I did not see a ghost. I did not see a person. I did not see anything at all. I only saw my dog react in a way that made me feel like I was not alone. That was enough. For a while afterward, I was more aware of the basement at night. I started noticing the corners more. I would lie in bed and look toward the areas the lamp did not fully light. I would listen to sounds from the walls. I would pay attention when the dogs paused at the doorway or stared toward the stairs. Nothing else happened exactly like that. No dog ever ran across the room and stared past me in the same way. No voice called my name. No door opened. No object moved. No shadow formed in the corner. It was just that one night. But sometimes one night is enough, especially when there is an animal involved. If it had only been me, I could have explained it away more easily. I could have blamed exhaustion. I could have blamed anxiety. I could have blamed the basement atmosphere, the late hour, the dim light, or a random feeling of being watched. But the dog had no reason to perform. The dog did not know I was trying to sleep. The dog did not know I had beliefs about ghosts. The dog just got up and moved away. And then stared. That is why the memory never fully faded. I have thought about the thing I said, too. I sometimes wonder whether it was ridiculous. Maybe nothing was there. And I was talking to an empty room because my dog heard a mouse in the wall. Maybe the dog was simply reacting to a smell. Maybe I was trying to make myself feel brave, but I also think there was something comforting in how I handled it. I did not challenge whatever it was. I did not insult it. I did not demand that it prove itself. I simply said I was tired and wanted privacy. That was all. Maybe that helped me more than anything. Maybe speaking calmly gave me a sense of control in a moment where I felt completely powerless. I had no way to know what the dog was seeing, hearing, or sensing. But I could choose how I responded. So I chose not to run. At least, not physically. Internally, I was terrified. My heart was beating so hard that I could barely think. I remember feeling my body go tense. I remember the strange urge to turn all the lights on, call for someone upstairs, and refuse to sleep in the basement again. But outwardly, I tried to be polite. I tried to sound calm. I tried to make it clear that whatever was there did not need to be afraid of me, but also that it was not welcome to stay in my room while I slept. It was probably the closest thing I could manage to a peaceful negotiation with the unknown. I do not know whether that makes the story less scary or more scary. The basement never became a place I refused to enter. I continued living there. I continued sleeping there. I continued letting one of the dogs stay in my room when they wanted to. But after that night, I always paid attention when a dog suddenly stared into an empty corner. I still do, honestly. Whenever a dog stops in the middle of a room and looks at something I cannot see, part of me remembers that night. The bedside lamp, the quiet basement, the dog beside me. Then the sudden movement across the room, the stare over my shoulder, and the feeling that someone had entered my room without making a sound. Maybe it was a mouse. Maybe it was a sound in the pipes. Maybe it was a scent I could not detect. Maybe it was nothing supernatural at all. But I know how it felt. And I know that I have never forgotten the look on my dog's face. When I was around 13 years old, I spent a lot of time outside with my childhood best friend, his older brother, and whatever group of neighborhood kids happened to be around that day. Back then, nobody needed much planning to hang out. You would walk to someone's house, knock on the door, ask if they could come outside. And before long, there would be a group of kids moving through the neighborhood with no real plan beyond not wanting to go home yet. We would end up at the park a lot. It was one of those parks that looked ordinary in the daytime, but changed completely after the sun started going down. It had a large open field with long grass around the edges, tall trees scattered throughout, and pine cones everywhere. The trees were older and taller than the ones around most of the houses. Their branches hung over parts of the trails, and when the wind moved through them, the whole park seemed to whisper. Behind the park was a forest, not a massive wilderness, but dense enough that it felt like one when you were a kid. There was a nature trail that led deeper into it, eventually reaching a gated section. The gate was usually locked at night. It was supposed to keep people out once it got late, though that never stopped kids from wandering around near it during the day. The forest was close to the neighborhood, but it felt separate from everything else. You could walk only a few minutes from houses, driveways, and streetlights, then find yourself surrounded by trees so thick that the neighborhood disappeared behind you. The deeper parts had old paths, hidden clearings, fallen branches, and abandoned things that older kids always talked about finding. There were stories about random junk left behind in there, broken furniture, rusted bikes, old tires, bits of wood, empty cans. Weird little structures people had built and abandoned. Nothing that was necessarily dangerous by itself, but enough to make the forest feel like it had a life of its own. The older kids always had stories. They had seen foxes. They had seen stray dogs. They had found old things in the woods they could not explain. Some of them claimed they had gone farther in than anyone else. Others claimed they had seen people living back there, though nobody ever had proof. Most of those stories were probably exaggerated. That was what kids did. But even then, we all knew there were things in those woods that we did not normally see in the neighborhood. There were no big animals around that we knew of. We might see a fox once in a while. Sometimes there were stray cats or small dogs. But the forest was dense, quiet, and mostly empty. At least, that was what we believed. One evening, I was at the park with my best friend, his older brother, and a larger group of friends. It was not completely dark yet, but the sunlight was fading. The sky still had some color in it, but the light was getting weaker. The park had that in-between look where you can still see where you are going, but the shadows under the trees start becoming deeper than they should be. The older kids were doing their own thing somewhere nearby. My friend and I were walking around the trails, talking about whatever 13-year-olds talk about when nobody is supervising them. We were probably acting like we were exploring even though we knew the park well. We walked near the field, along the trails, and close to the edge where the grass got taller and the trees started. The long grass came up high enough in some places that you could not see what was inside it. That was normal. It had always been there. Still, at some point, we noticed something watching us. At first, it was only a shape, a dark silhouette low in the grass. I remember thinking it looked small. Maybe a fox, maybe a stray dog, maybe a cat. It was too dark and too far away to tell. The thing was partially hidden, and the grass around it moved slightly in the wind. We stopped walking and looked at it. It did not run. It did not move away. It just stared. There was something unsettling about how still it was. Animals usually do one of two things when they notice kids. They run away, or they move around enough that you can tell what they are. This thing did neither. It stayed low in the grass, facing us. My friend and I stood there for a moment, trying to figure out what we were looking at. "Is that a dog?" One of us probably said. "Maybe," the other answered. But it did not look like any dog I had seen around the neighborhood. The silhouette was strange. At first, because it was low in the grass, it seemed small. But the longer we watched, the more difficult it became to judge its size. It shifted slightly, and suddenly it seemed taller than we had thought. Then, it started moving closer. Not running, not charging, just moving forward through the grass. The sound was faint, mostly the grass brushing against itself and the occasional snap of something under its weight. We could not see enough of the body to understand what kind of animal it was. We only saw the shape getting closer. That was when the feeling changed. Before, it had been curiosity. Now it was fear. Not a loud panic. Not the kind where you immediately scream and run. More like a heavy warning feeling in my chest that told me we should leave. My friend felt it too. I could tell because he stopped making jokes. We looked at the thing for another second, then walked back toward the group. We did not exactly run, but we moved faster. The whole way back, I kept looking over my shoulder. The field looked normal from a distance. Long grass, shadow, trees, but I could still see movement near the edge. Whatever had been in the grass was still there, and it was closer. That was the part that bothered me. It had not stayed where we first saw it. It had followed. Not directly behind us, not out in the open, but closer than before. I remember getting an overwhelming feeling that something was going to happen. I did not know what. Maybe I thought the animal would come out of the grass. Maybe I thought it would chase us. Maybe I just felt like we were not supposed to be there anymore. At 13, you do not always have words for fear. You just know when something feels wrong. When we reached the group, I tried to act normal. I did not want to sound scared in front of the older kids. I did not want them to laugh and say it was probably just a raccoon or a dog, so I did not make a huge deal out of it. But I kept looking toward the field. The silhouette seemed closer again. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe the shadows had changed. Maybe it had moved in a way that made it look bigger than it was. But I remember feeling like it was watching us. Not just me and my friend anymore. The whole group. It was getting darker by then, and the park started feeling less like a park and more like the edge of something we did not understand. The trees looked taller. The trails looked narrower. The forest behind the field looked completely black. Then our ride came. I do not remember who picked us up. Maybe a parent. Maybe somebody's older sibling. But I remember how relieved I felt when headlights pulled into the area and we started leaving. We got out of there shortly after. The strange feeling stayed with me all night. There were a few other odd things that happened later that evening, but I barely remember them clearly now. I only remember that I felt unsettled for the rest of the night. I kept thinking about the thing in the grass. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. A fox, a stray dog, a deer. Some animal that had wandered close to the park. But the silhouette did not fit neatly in my memory. It had seemed too low at first, then too large. It had moved closer without fully revealing itself. It had not acted like an animal that was afraid of people. And the feeling I had when I saw it was stronger than it should have been. I did not tell many people about it afterward. It sounded stupid even in my own head. We saw something in tall grass at the park. That could be anything. And maybe it was. Years passed. I grew up. I spent less time at that park, then eventually stopped thinking about it much at all. The forest was still there, the same dense patch of trees behind the neighborhood, but it became part of the background of life. Then, a few years later, something happened that brought all of those feelings back. A friend of mine lived near the other entrance to that forest. Behind his house was the gated section of the nature trail. The gate was usually locked, especially at night. But the area around it had become a place where kids in the neighborhood gathered. At some point, his parents and a few neighbors had helped build a makeshift airsoft setup. It was not anything official, just thin sheets of wood, old pallets, pieces of scrap lumber, and a rough fort built near the edge of the forest. There was a large hole dug out in the ground, deep enough for several kids to sit inside. Thin wood pallets covered the top, creating a kind of hidden bunker. It was not well built. Looking back, it was probably a terrible idea. The walls were rough. The wood was thin. The covering above us could have shifted if enough weight was on it. The hole was damp sometimes, and there were probably bugs, roots, and all kinds of things under the dirt. But when you are a kid, it feels amazing. It felt like a secret base. We used it when we played manhunt. We used it during airsoft games. We would hide inside it when we wanted to avoid being found. Sometimes we would just sit in there and talk, because it felt like our own private underground room. The forest was close enough that the air always felt colder near the bunker, especially at night. The trees blocked the light from nearby houses, and once the sun went down, the darkness came quickly. One night, a lot of people came over. There were more kids than usual, friends of friends, neighborhood kids, people who knew somebody else in the group. We all ended up gathering near the fort after dark. The older kids had been messing around with airsoft stuff earlier. Some people were playing manhunt. Some were just hanging out. Everyone was talking over everyone else, laughing, pushing each other, acting brave, because there were enough people around that nobody wanted to admit being scared of the dark woods. Eventually, a bunch of us climbed into the hole. There were several of us packed inside. We covered the top with the thin wooden pallets, leaving small gaps where a little air and light could get through. It was cramped, but that was part of the fun. Somebody was sitting on a root. Somebody else had dirt on their clothes. People were whispering because the space made everything feel secret. Outside, the forest was dark. Not regular night dark. Forest dark. The kind where you cannot see more than a few feet past the edge of the yard. The trees formed a wall of blackness behind the fort. Any sound could have come from anywhere. At first, we were all talking. We joked about being hidden. We talked about who would find us during manhunt. We laughed about how bad the bunker smelled. Someone probably told a scary story, because that always happened when a group of kids were sitting underground in the dark. Then it got later. The noise from the neighborhood started dying down. People were heading inside. Parents were calling kids home. The air got colder. At some point, we all became quieter. That was when we heard something moving above us. At first, it sounded like a small shift, a scrape against wood, a faint pressure on the pallets overhead. We all stopped talking. Nobody said anything for a second. Then there was another sound, a heavier step. The thin wood above us creaked. It was not the sound of one of our friends climbing onto the bunker. We knew what that sounded like. Kids had stood on it before. You could hear them laughing, hear their shoes, hear their voices through the gaps. This was quieter. Slower, heavier, something was walking on top of us. The pallets shifted slightly. A little dirt fell through one of the cracks. Someone inside the hole whispered, "What is that?" Nobody answered. Then we heard it again. A scuffling movement. Something circling or stepping carefully over the top of the bunker. The wood creaked once more. I remember my body going completely still. There were enough people in the hole that we were pressed close together, but suddenly it felt like everyone was trying to make themselves smaller. Nobody wanted to breathe too loudly. Nobody wanted to shift their feet. Nobody wanted to be the person who made a sound that attracted whatever was above us. Then we heard the breathing. That was the part nobody forgot. It was loud. Not loud like a person talking. Loud because it was close. Right over us. The sound came through the gaps in the pallets. Heavy breathing. Sniffing. The kind of sound an animal makes when it is trying to figure out what something is. It would inhale. Pause. Then sniff again. You could hear it moving its head close to the wood. The pallets creaked as weight shifted above us. I remember thinking that whatever it was had to be bigger than a fox. A fox would have been lighter. A stray dog might have been possible, but this sounded heavier than the small dogs we sometimes saw around the neighborhood. A raccoon could have made noises, but the breathing did not sound like a raccoon to me. It sounded too deep, too close, too deliberate. Of course, I was scared. Everyone was. But there was something especially terrifying about being trapped underneath it. We could not see what it was. We could not climb out without lifting the cover or crawling into the open. We could not call anyone easily. Back then, most of us did not have phones. We did not have a way to quietly text someone. We could not just call a parent from inside the bunker and explain that something large was standing on top of us. The adults were in the nearby houses, but not close enough to hear us whispering. So we sat there. We waited. The thing kept moving around above us. Sometimes the sound was directly over my head. Sometimes it shifted toward one side. The wood scraped lightly. The breathing came again, Sniff, pause, sniff. I remember trying to picture what it could be. A dog, a deer, a person, something from the forest. But every option felt bad in a different way. If it was a dog, why was it so quiet? If it was a deer, why was it sniffing around the bunker like that? If it was a person, why were they not speaking? And if it was something else, I did not want to think about it. Nobody moved. Nobody wanted to make a joke anymore. The fear inside that hole was overwhelming. Not because we knew what was there. Because we did not. When you are underground, even in a shallow makeshift bunker, every sound above you feels bigger. The pallets became a ceiling between us, and something we could not see. They seemed thin. Too thin. I remember thinking that if the thing jumped or pressed down too hard, the wood might collapse. The whole time, I kept remembering the park. The silhouette in the long grass. The feeling of being watched. The shape moving closer without showing itself. That old fear came back so clearly that it almost made me sick. I wondered whether it was connected. I knew that was probably irrational. Years had passed. The park was not exactly the same place as my friend's backyard. The forest was big enough that many animals could have moved through it. Still, the same forest connected everything. The gate, the trails, the dense trees, the places where older kids said they had seen strange things. I kept thinking about the thing in the grass. Had it been an animal from the forest? Had it followed the trail system? Had it been something ordinary that looked terrifying because we were young? Or was my mind connecting two unrelated scary moments because both happened near the woods? I do not know. Eventually, the adults came outside. I do not know whether someone heard us earlier, whether a parent realized how late it was, or whether one of the kids had managed to get word to them. But we heard voices from near the house, adults calling for us, telling us it was getting late, telling us to come inside. The sound above the bunker stopped. That was almost worse for a second. The breathing stopped. The scuffling stopped. Everything went silent. We waited. Nobody wanted to be the first person to climb out. Finally, someone lifted part of the pallet covering. Cold night air rushed into the hole. We climbed out quickly, one after another. I remember looking around immediately. The yard was dark. The trees behind the fort were darker. There was no animal standing there. No dog, no deer, no person, no sign of anything at all. The ground around the bunker did not tell us much either. It was dirt, grass, fallen leaves, and marks from all the kids who had been running around earlier. Even if there had been tracks, we probably would not have recognized them. The adults did not seem worried. To them, we were just kids who had stayed outside too late. Maybe they thought we were scaring ourselves. Maybe they did not hear the same thing we heard. We went inside eventually. People tried to talk about it, but nobody had a clear answer. Some said it was probably a dog. Some said it might have been a raccoon. Someone suggested a deer. Someone else said maybe one of the older kids had been messing with us. But nobody knew. And nobody wanted to go back outside to check. I am 26 now, and I still think about both of those experiences. The first one is harder to explain because of the way the silhouette seemed to change size. It looked small at first, then larger as it got closer. Maybe that was only perspective. Maybe it was crouched in the grass, then stood up. Maybe it was a normal animal that looked huge because we were scared. The second one is harder to explain because of the breathing. Something was definitely moving on top of us. Something had weight. Something was sniffing around the pallet cover. Could it have been a large dog? Yes, could it have been a deer? Maybe. Could it have been some animal that wandered closer to the neighborhood than we realized? Absolutely, the forest may have seemed empty to us, but dense woods are rarely empty. There are animals everywhere, even when people do not see them. We only knew about foxes, stray dogs, and the occasional small animal because those were the things that came close enough to the neighborhood for us to notice. There could have been other things out there. That is the logical explanation. But there is still something about the way both moments felt. The first time, there was a silhouette watching from the long grass. The second time, there was something directly above us, breathing through the gaps in thin wooden pallets. Both times, I felt the same heavy fear, the same sense that the forest was not as empty as we thought. I do not claim it was anything supernatural. I do not know that it was a monster. I do not know that the two events were connected. They could have been normal animal encounters that became terrifying because I was young and could not see clearly. Darkness makes everything bigger. Fear makes every sound more meaningful. A dog in tall grass can look like anything. An animal sniffing above a bunker can sound enormous when you are trapped underneath it. But even with all of that, the memories stayed. I can still picture the long grass moving near the edge of the field. I can still remember the silhouette staring. I can still feel the tension of walking back toward the group, trying not to look afraid while knowing the thing had moved closer. And I can still remember sitting underground years later, pressed in with other kids, listening to slow breathing above us while the pallets creaked. Those memories are not dramatic because I saw a creature clearly. They are dramatic because I did not. Whatever was out there stayed hidden. And sometimes, not knowing what was watching you is worse than seeing it. Sorry to pause for just a moment. If this is your first time here, welcome. I hope you're enjoying the calm so far. If you'd like more nights like this, true stories, gentle rain, no interruptions, please subscribe to Lacuna Noir. It really helps me keep creating these peaceful experiences for you. And tap the bell so you're here every time a new story arrives in the dark. Now, back to the story. When I was probably 11 or 12 years old, sometime in the late 1990s, I got lost in the woods with one of my buddy's little brothers. This was before kids had cell phones in their pockets. Even adults did not have phones that worked everywhere the way they do now. If you were out in the mountains, you were out in the mountains. There was no checking a map, no calling for help, no sending your location to somebody, and no easy way to get rescued unless another person happened to find you. At that age, none of us really thought about that. We were kids. We were with a group. There were adults somewhere nearby. We were on a trail. Everything felt safe because it was supposed to be safe. I do not remember exactly where we were hiking, only that it was a wooded mountain area with trails, steep ground, and enough distance between landmarks that once you left the path, everything started looking the same. Trees, brush, rocks, fallen logs, dirt, and slopes. The kind of place where you can turn around once and suddenly have no idea which direction you came from. There was a group of us out there that day. Some older kids, a few adults, and younger kids who were probably supposed to stay close. One of my friends had a little brother with him. He was younger than me, and like a lot of younger kids, he had a habit of drifting away when something caught his attention. At first, nobody seemed too worried. He had only wandered a little ways off the trail. He was not sprinting away or screaming. He was just heading into the trees, following whatever strange kid logic had convinced him that something more interesting was over there. I saw him moving away from the group and went after him. I remember thinking I would just grab him, tell him to come back, and be back with everyone in a minute or two. That was the plan. I left the trail, stepped through the brush, and followed him. At first, I could still hear people behind us, voices carried through the trees, someone laughing, someone calling out. The trail was not far away. I could see enough gaps through the branches that I figured I knew exactly where we were. Then the little brother took off. He just booked it. 1 second, I had almost caught up to him. The next, he was running through the woods as fast as he could, ducking around trees and pushing through brush. I remember yelling at him to stop. He did not stop. I followed. I was not thinking. I was just reacting. I did not want him getting farther away. He was younger than me, and I felt responsible for bringing him back. So I ran after him, over roots and rocks, down uneven ground, through low branches that slapped at my arms and face. Then I lost the sounds of the group. That was the first moment I realized something was wrong. Not seriously wrong yet. Not in the way where you imagine a rescue helicopter or spending the night outside, but wrong enough that I stopped and listened. There was nothing. No voices. No trail noise. No adults calling. No sound of people walking nearby. Just the woods. The little brother was still ahead of me, and I finally got close enough to make him stop. I do not remember exactly how I did it. Maybe I caught his arm. Maybe I stepped in front of him. Maybe he ran out of energy or finally realized we were alone. But once he stopped, we both looked around. There was no trail, no sign of the group, no obvious direction back, no footprints we could follow. Nothing. The trees looked the same in every direction. That is the problem with being lost in the woods when you are a kid. You do not understand just how quickly you can become lost. You think you have only gone a few minutes away from something familiar, but in thick terrain. A few minutes of running downhill and weaving around trees can put you in a completely different place. At first, I tried to act calm. I told him we would just go back. That was the obvious answer. We would turn around, head the direction we came from, and find the trail. Except neither of us could agree on which direction that was. Everything looked different from where we were standing. The slope was steep enough that we could not see far. Trees blocked most of the view. The ground was uneven. There were no signs, no trail markers, no buildings, no power lines, nothing that told us where people might be. We started making our way generally downhill. That was all we could think to do. People always say water runs downhill, roads often follow low ground, and eventually you might find a creek, a lake, a road, or something connected to people. We did not know whether that was good advice. We were just two kids trying to make a decision. So we went down. For the first hour, I still believed we would find the group. I figured the trail might curve around the slope. Maybe we would come across another path. Maybe we would hear someone calling. Maybe the adults would notice we were gone and start looking. But as time went on, the woods seemed to get bigger. We kept walking. We stopped sometimes to listen. We called out. Nobody answered. At some point, we both got quiet. The little brother was scared, though he was trying not to show it. I was scared too, but I felt like I had to be the older one, even though I was barely older. I kept saying things like, "We're okay, and we'll find a road, and we just have to keep going." I did not know whether any of it was true. Hours passed. I know now that it was probably 5 or 6 hours, but at the time it felt much longer. When you are hungry, tired, and lost, time moves strangely. Every stretch of trees looks like the last stretch. Every hill feels like it might lead somewhere. Every sound makes you stop and hope it is a person. We walked through brush. We stepped over fallen trees. We moved around rocks and muddy patches. We crossed small, wet areas where the ground sank under our shoes. The sun kept moving. That was what made everything worse. At first, it had been a normal day. There was light in the woods. You could see where you were stepping. But as afternoon went on, the shadows grew longer. The trees began blocking more of the sun. The air cooled down. We knew night was coming. Eventually, we came to a lake. It appeared through the trees, dark and still, with the water reflecting whatever light was left in the sky. I remember feeling relieved when we saw it. A lake meant something. It meant we had found a landmark. It meant we were not just wandering through endless forest anymore. We followed the shoreline. The ground around it was easier to walk in some places, though still uneven. The lake seemed quiet. Too quiet, really. No boats. No people fishing. No cabins with lights on. No voices. Just water, trees, and the sound of us walking. Then we saw buildings. At first, I thought we had been saved. There were cabins near the lake and a larger main building. It looked like some kind of camp. Maybe a summer camp, a fishing camp, a retreat center, or an old lodge. From a distance, it was exactly what we needed. People, a phone, a car, someone who could tell us where we were. We headed toward it as fast as we could. But when we got closer, something felt wrong. The buildings were there, but there was no sign of anyone. No smoke from chimneys, no lights, no cars, no voices, no people walking around. We went up to the nearest cabin and looked through the windows. It looked like people had simply disappeared. The beds looked slept in, not neatly made and abandoned like a place that had been closed for years. The blankets looked rumpled. Pillows were out of place. There were signs that people had been there, or at least had been there at some point. But everything looked dusty. That was the strange part. The room looked both used and unused at the same time, like someone had gotten up from the bed one day, walked out, and never returned. Then years of dust had quietly settled over everything. We checked another cabin. Same feeling. Empty, still, dusty, but not stripped clean. Then we looked into the main building. There were tables inside, plates, silverware, dishes sitting where they had been left. It looked as though a meal had been interrupted. There were no people sitting at the tables, no sounds from a kitchen, no movement in the halls, just empty rooms with things left behind. We stood outside, looking through the windows, trying to understand it. We were kids, but we knew better than to smash a window and climb into an empty building. For one thing, we were already lost. Breaking into a building would only make things worse. We did not know whether someone owned the place, whether it was dangerous, or whether there might be something inside we did not want to find. So we stayed outside. We walked around the buildings, calling out, "Hello?" Nothing, no answer. No dog barking, no person shouting back. No sign that anyone had heard us. The camp felt wrong. Not haunted wrong, exactly at least. That was not what I thought at the time. It felt abandoned in a way that did not make sense. There were too many signs of people, but no actual people. The place did not look completely destroyed or burned down. It did not look like a ruin. It just looked empty. And we were two kids who had been lost for hours, standing beside a lake, with the sun getting lower. Eventually, we found a gravel road. That felt like another piece of luck. A road meant cars. Cars meant people. Even if the camp was abandoned, the road had to lead somewhere. We figured we could follow it until it reached a larger road, find a driveway, flag down a car, or eventually come across a house. So we started walking. The road was narrow and rough, but it was clearly a road. Gravel, packed dirt, tire marks that may or may not have been old, trees lining both sides. We followed it in the direction that seemed most likely to lead away from the camp. For the first few minutes, I felt better. We had a road. We were not forcing our way through brush anymore. We could walk faster. We could see ahead. I kept telling the little brother that we would find a main road soon, but after about 30 minutes, nothing had changed. No side roads, no driveways, no cabins, no cars, no signs. The road did not fork. It just kept going through the woods. Then it stopped. Not at a gate, not at a turn, not at a larger road. It just dead-ended in the forest. There were fully grown trees where the road should have continued. That was one of the strangest things I have ever seen. The gravel road seemed to lead straight away from the camp, and we followed it expecting it to connect to something. Instead, it ended at a wall of trees. Not young trees, not brush growing over an old path. Fully grown trees, tall enough that they had clearly been there for a long time. It was as though the road had been built from the middle of nowhere to the camp, then stopped in the middle of nowhere. We stood there staring at it. I remember feeling completely defeated. The sun was getting low. It was getting cold. We had no idea where we were. We had found what looked like an abandoned camp, followed the only road out, and ended up right back in the woods. At that point, I started to understand that we might not get home before dark. That was terrifying. I did not say it out loud because I did not want to scare the little brother more than he already was. But I was thinking about what would happen if the sun went down completely. We had no flashlight, no jackets, at least not enough for the cold, no food, no water except whatever we could find, no way to call anyone, and no idea how far we were from the trail. We turned around and kept moving. I do not know why we chose the direction we did after that. We were just trying to get somewhere lower, somewhere open, somewhere with any sign of people. The woods got darker. The temperature dropped. Every sound became more noticeable. We heard branches move in the distance and wondered if it was people searching for us. We called out again. Nothing answered. We kept walking. Then, not long after it had become properly dark, we came to another clearing. Across a large field, we saw a house. There were lights on. I do not think I have ever felt relief like that before. It was not just a building. It was a real house, a place with people inside, a place where someone might answer a door, let us call our parents, and tell us what to do. We crossed the field as fast as we could. I remember being exhausted, but adrenaline kept us moving. We went up to the house and knocked. Someone answered. The person who came to the door was an older man. He listened while we tried to explain what had happened. I am sure we sounded confused. We were tired, dirty, hungry, and probably talking too fast. We told him we had been on a trail. We told him the younger kid had wandered away. We told him we tried to find our way back. We told him we found a lake. We told him about the cabins. We told him about the empty camp and the gravel road that dead-ended in the woods. The man's expression changed as we spoke. But before he said much about the camp, he told us something that made the whole situation feel even more real. He was a retired police officer, and he had already heard about us on his radio. A search and rescue effort was underway. People were looking. There was even a helicopter involved. At first, I could barely process that. A helicopter. Search and rescue. All of those words sounded huge. They made it clear that we had not just wandered off for an hour. We had been missing long enough that adults were seriously worried. The retired officer did not get angry at us. He did not yell. He seemed relieved that we were safe. He got us inside, gave us something to drink, and made sure we were okay. He was more than willing to help because, honestly, who would not help two lost kids who came out of the woods after dark? Eventually, he contacted the people involved in the search. We were safe. But we were nowhere near where we thought we were. We had somehow ended up several mountains away from the trailhead where we started. 3 mountains away, according to what I was later told. The drive back to the original trailhead was over an hour. Over an hour by car. That was hard to understand. We had not realized we had traveled that far. We knew we had been walking for hours, but we had not imagined we were so far from the group. We had followed slopes, wandered through woods, gone around a lake, found a camp, followed a road, then kept moving. But 3 mountains away? It seemed impossible. The part that really stayed with me, though, was what happened when we told people about the camp. The retired cop had lived and worked in the area for decades. He had never heard of it. The search and rescue people had never heard of it. The people involved in the air search had flown around that region before. They knew the terrain. They knew trails, clearings, roads, cabins, and landmarks. They had never seen or heard of a camp like the one we described. That was the part nobody could explain. Not the lake itself. Not the idea of old buildings in the woods. There are plenty of forgotten structures in mountain areas. Old fishing camps, hunting cabins, private land, abandoned lodges, old summer camps. Places that shut down and get swallowed by forest. But this was not just one old cabin. It was a small group of buildings. Cabins with beds. A main building with tables and dishes. A gravel road that went from the woods to the camp and nowhere else. And nobody who knew the area had heard of it. I remember trying to explain that we did not make it up. We had seen the beds. We had looked through the windows. We had seen the dishes and silverware sitting on tables. We had walked that road ourselves. The road had ended in fully grown trees. It was real. At least, it was real to us. The adults did not accuse us of lying, as far as I remember. They were probably more focused on the fact that we had been found alive and safe. But their confusion made the whole thing feel worse. If the camp was real, why did nobody know about it? If it had been abandoned, why did the beds look recently slept in? If it had been used, why were there no people, cars, lights, or signs of activity? If there was a road, where did it start? Why did it end in the woods? And how had we ended up so far away from where we began? I have thought about it many times over the years. Maybe we were mistaken about the camp. Maybe it was a private hunting lodge or an old retreat center nobody involved in the search happened to know about. Maybe the beds only looked slept in because the blankets were old and rumpled. Maybe the dishes had been left there years before, and the dust made the place look stranger than it was. Maybe the road had once connected to another route, but the forest had grown over part of it so completely that we did not recognize what we were seeing. Maybe the adults simply did not have complete knowledge of every abandoned building in the mountains. All of those explanations are possible. But the people who searched for us were local. The retired cop knew the area. The rescue workers knew the area. The helicopter crew knew the area from above. And none of them recognized what we described. That is what still bothers me. Not because I think we stepped into another dimension or found a ghost camp. I do not know what happened. Maybe there is a completely ordinary explanation buried somewhere in local history. Maybe the camp had been demolished later. Maybe it was privately owned and hidden. Maybe the map information people had was incomplete. But I remember the feeling of standing outside those cabins. The dusty windows. The beds that looked like someone had left them in a hurry. The main room with dishes on the tables. The quiet lake nearby. The gravel road stretching away from the camp. Then the dead end. The trees. The darkness starting to settle in around us. And finally, the house across the field, where a retired cop opened the door and told us people had been looking for us from the ground and from the air. I was only a kid. The little brother was even younger. We did not have phones. We did not have a map. We did not have the experience to understand how far we had gone or how dangerous it was getting. We just followed a runaway child into the woods and ended up somewhere nobody could properly explain. Maybe the camp was real. Maybe it was forgotten. Maybe it was hidden. Maybe we misunderstood what we saw because we were cold, tired, and scared. But I know we saw it. And I know that after all these years, the strangest part is not getting lost. It is that no one who came looking for us had ever heard of the place where we spent part of that day. I was about 13 years old when the first thing happened to me in that house. It was an ordinary afternoon or early evening, at least as ordinary as I remember it. I was home, doing what I was doing, and at some point I went into the bathroom and shut the door behind me. There was nothing unusual about the house at first glance. It was just our family home. It had the normal sounds every house has: pipes shifting, doors settling, people moving around, the television in another room, wind against the windows, and the occasional creak in the hallway when someone walked past. But that day, I was alone in the bathroom with the door shut when I heard someone whistling on the other side. It was not a noise from outside. It was not the television. It sounded close. Close enough that it seemed like someone was standing right outside the bathroom door, whistling quietly in the hallway. At first, I thought it had to be my brother. That was the most obvious explanation. Maybe he had come home without me hearing him. Maybe he was trying to annoy me. Maybe he had noticed I was in the bathroom and decided to be stupid about it. Because that was the kind of thing brothers do. I stopped what I was doing and listened. The whistling continued for another second or two. It was not a tune I recognized. It was just a small, casual whistle, like someone making noise because they were bored. I opened the bathroom door. There was nobody there. The hallway was empty. I leaned out and looked both ways. Nothing, no brother, no parent, no one in the nearby rooms, no sound of footsteps going away. I remember thinking it was strange, but not scary yet. Houses make strange noises. Maybe it had come from outside. Maybe the sound traveled from a television or a neighbor. Maybe I had misunderstood where it came from. So I shut the door again and went back to what I was doing. Then the whistling started again. This time, it felt closer. I froze for a second. The sound was definitely on the other side of the door. I opened it again, faster than before. Still nothing. The hallway was empty. No one was standing near the door. No one was walking away. No door had clicked shut in another room. There was no sound of someone laughing or hiding. Just silence. That was when I started feeling uncomfortable. I shut the bathroom door again, but I was not relaxed anymore. I kept listening. Every small sound in the house suddenly seemed louder. The hum of the lights, the soft movement of air through the vents, something shifting upstairs or somewhere in the walls. I tried to tell myself it was my imagination. But then, the whistling came back. I do not remember how many times it happened in total. It could have been twice. It could have been 3 times. What I remember most is the growing certainty that someone was outside the door, followed every time by the same empty hallway when I checked. Eventually, I was too unsettled to ignore it. I finished up as fast as I could and decided I was going to investigate properly. At that point, I still believed my brother was probably home. I thought maybe he was ducking into another room when I opened the door. Maybe he had managed to hide somewhere. Maybe he was trying to scare me, and I was walking straight into it. I opened the bathroom door and stepped out. The hallway was empty. I looked toward my brother's room. Nothing. I looked toward the living room. Nothing. I called out his name. No answer. I was standing there trying to decide where else to check when something hit the bathroom door from the other side. It was a loud bang. Not a tap. Not the soft sound of the door moving in its frame. A hard impact, like someone had thrown their body or shoulder into the door. The noise made me jump so badly that for a second I could not think. The worst part was that I had already been opening the door. I was right there. My hand was on the handle. The door had barely started to move, so I pulled it open immediately. There was no delay. Less than a second had passed between the bang and me looking into the hallway. There was nobody there. Nothing. No one standing in front of the door. No one crouched beside it. No one running into a bedroom. No one laughing. The hallway was completely empty. But I heard something moving away. It sounded like a kid running down the hall. Fast little footsteps. The sound went away from me, toward the front of the house. I looked down the hallway immediately. I expected to see someone's back disappearing around the corner. There was nothing. Then, a second later, I heard the front door open. The sound was unmistakable. The door swung open, then hit the wall with a loud bang. I ran toward it. I was scared, but I was also angry and confused. I thought maybe someone had gotten into the house. Maybe it was my brother. Maybe it was another kid from the neighborhood. Maybe somebody had been messing with me the whole time and ran out the front door. I reached the front entryway. The front door was shut. Locked, deadlocked, I remember grabbing the handle and staring at it. The sound had been clear. I heard the door swing open. I heard it strike the wall. I heard the hallway footsteps running toward it. But the door had never opened. The deadlock was still engaged. No one could have run out without unlocking it. No one could have slammed it open and then somehow locked it again from outside in less than a second. I stood there in the hallway, staring at the door, trying to make sense of it. Then I panicked. I did not want to be in that house anymore. I did not care whether I looked stupid. I did not care whether my dad would laugh or whether anyone would say I was imagining things. I just did not want to be alone inside after hearing someone whistle outside the bathroom, slam the door, run down the hall, and apparently open a locked front door without actually opening it. So I went outside. I do not remember exactly how fast I moved, but I remember ending up sitting out the front of the house in my underwear. I had not taken time to get dressed properly. I had not grabbed shoes. I had not grabbed anything useful. I had just gotten out. I sat there waiting for my dad to come home. It felt like forever. Every car that passed made me look up. Every sound from inside the house made me tense. I did not want to go back in for clothes. I did not want to get a jacket. I did not want to step through that front door again. Eventually, my dad came home. He saw me sitting out front and had no idea what was going on. He said something like, "What the hell are you doing?" I was crying by then, or close to it. I told him I was not going back in there. I tried to explain what happened. The whistling, the empty hallway, the bang against the bathroom door, the footsteps, the front door noise, the fact that the door was still locked. My dad laughed. Not in a cruel way, at least not intentionally. I think he thought I was just scared of a noise in the house. Maybe he thought I had worked myself up. Maybe he assumed my brother had played a prank and I had overreacted. But I was terrified. And when he laughed, I cried harder. It is one thing to be scared of something you do not understand. It is another thing to feel like nobody believes you. Eventually, I went back inside because I had no choice. I was still a kid. It was my home. My dad was there. The house looked normal again. The front door was still locked. The hallway was still empty. Nothing else happened that night. At least, not that I remember. But I could not stop thinking about it. For a while after that, I was afraid of going into the bathroom alone. I listened for whistling. I looked down the hallway before shutting doors. I paid attention to the front door lock. I became hyper-aware of every small sound in the house. And then, sometime later, I told my mom what had happened. I expected her to do what my dad did. I expected her to say it was the pipes, the wind, my brother, a dream, or my imagination. Instead, she sat me down. Her reaction was different. She did not laugh. She did not look surprised exactly, but she looked serious in a way that made me even more nervous. Then she told me something she had kept from us kids. She said that she had experienced strange things in the house too. Not just once. Not just a weird noise here and there. She said there had been things that made her feel like someone else was around. Sounds, feelings, moments where she thought she was not alone even though she should have been. She had never told us because she did not want to scare us. That was the first time I realized the house might have had a history I did not know about. My mom said she had spoken to 2 different spiritual people over time. I do not know exactly how she found them. Maybe they were recommended by friends. Maybe she talked to people who claimed to be sensitive to spirits. Maybe she was looking for answers because the strange things had bothered her for a long time. Whatever the reason, 2 separate people had told her something similar. They said there was a daughter running around the house. Not an evil spirit. Not something threatening. A little girl. A child presence. They told my mom that there was a young girl connected to the house. Someone who seemed to move through the rooms and make herself known in small ways. That was when my mom told me something else. She had had a miscarriage before. She had been pregnant with a girl, and she and my dad had chosen a name. The spiritual people had somehow named the same girl. Not just said there was a child spirit. They said the name my parents had planned to give her. I remember feeling cold when my mom told me that, because suddenly the whistling sounded different in my mind. The running footsteps sounded different. The bang on the bathroom door sounded different. The front door opening and closing sounded different. I had been imagining some random stranger in the hallway. Maybe another kid, maybe my brother playing a prank, maybe someone breaking in. But my mom's explanation gave it a shape I had not considered. A little girl, someone running through the house, someone who wanted attention, someone who might not understand why nobody could see her. I did not know what to believe. Part of me wanted to accept it because it made the whole experience less frightening. If it was a child spirit, maybe it was not trying to hurt me. Maybe the whistling was just a way of getting my attention. Maybe the bang on the door was not meant to scare me. Maybe the sound of running down the hallway was simply what she did. But another part of me felt worse, because if my mom was right, then I had not imagined it. Something really had been there, and it had been close enough to stand outside the bathroom door. It had been close enough to hit the door. It had been close enough to run past me in a hallway I could see was empty. The part about the name stayed with me the most. I do not know how those spiritual people knew it. Maybe my mom had mentioned details without realizing it. Maybe there was some ordinary explanation. Maybe the name was a coincidence. Maybe memory has changed the story over the years. I cannot prove any of it. But my mom believed it. And because she had hidden her own experiences from us, it did not feel like she was trying to make the story bigger. She seemed like she had been trying to keep us from being scared. She only told me after I came to her terrified. One of the spiritual people had apparently told her to get a cat. They said having a cat in the house would help stop the strange activity. I do not know why. I do not know whether the person believed cats changed the energy of a home, protected people, scared away spirits, or simply made a house feel calmer. It sounded strange to me. But not long after that, maybe a couple of weeks later, a stray cat showed up in our backyard. It would not leave. At first, it was just there outside. It would sit near the back door, wander through the yard, and come back again. We tried to ignore it, but it kept returning. Eventually, it became clear that it had decided our house was home. We took it in. That cat stayed with us for 10 years. For a long time after the cat came, the house felt quieter. Not perfect, not silent. But the really strange things seemed to stop. No more whistling outside the bathroom door. No more hard bangs from empty hallways. No more footsteps that sounded like a child running through the house when nobody was there. No more front door noises that made no sense. Maybe that was because we had a cat. Maybe the cat made noises that gave us normal explanations. Maybe having another animal around changed the atmosphere of the house. Maybe we simply stopped noticing strange things because life went on. Or maybe, if you believe that sort of thing, the cat did exactly what the spiritual person said it would do. For 10 years, the cat was part of our family. It slept in warm spots around the house, sat in windows, showed up at doors when it wanted food, and acted like it owned the place. Over time, it became impossible to imagine the house without it. Then the cat died. That was hard enough on its own. Pets become part of the rhythm of a house. You get used to hearing them move around, seeing them in certain rooms, finding them in their favorite sleeping places. When they are gone, the house feels too quiet in a different way. Not long after the cat died, my brother mentioned hearing strange noises. He said something about sounds in the house that he could not explain. I do not remember exactly what he described. Maybe footsteps, maybe movement, maybe noises from rooms that should have been empty. But the important thing was that he had never been told the full story. We had not sat him down and explained what had happened to me. We had not told him about the spiritual people. We had not told him about the daughter my mum believed was in the house. We had not told him about the cat supposedly stopping things. So when he mentioned weird noises after the cat was gone, it made the old fear come back. It was like the house had started breathing again after years of being quiet. I still do not know what I believe. I have tried to explain it logically. The whistling could have been sound from somewhere else in the house. The bang on the bathroom door could have been something shifting in the walls or the door frame. The running sound could have been pipes, vents, or noise from outside bouncing through the hallway. The front door sound could have been another door closing, or a sound I misheard because I was already scared. The deadlock could have stayed engaged because the door never actually opened. All of that is possible. Fear can make ordinary sounds feel intentional. A kid alone in a bathroom can hear a whistle and immediately assume somebody is on the other side of the door. Once the fear starts, the brain connects everything that follows. But I was there. I know how close the sound was. I know I opened the door immediately after the bang. I know the hallway was empty. I know I heard running footsteps in front of me and saw nothing. I know I heard what sounded like the front door opening and slamming against the wall, then found it locked. And I know my mum told me about things she had experienced before I ever said anything to her. Maybe we were all interpreting normal events through the same kind of fear. Maybe the house had bad acoustics. Maybe the cat changed nothing, and the timing was coincidence. Maybe my brother heard normal house sounds after the cat died, and our minds connected it to old stories. That is the rational way to look at it. But there is still a part of me that thinks about that little girl. Not in a dramatic horror movie way, not as something evil. More like someone who never got to grow up. Someone who might have been running down the hallway because that was all she knew how to do. Someone who whistled outside a closed door because she wanted someone to notice her. Someone who hit the bathroom door because I kept opening it and seeing nothing. Someone who ran toward the front door because she thought she was leaving the house, even though the lock never moved. I do not know whether that is comforting or terrifying. Maybe it is both. What I do know is that I never forgot the first moment. I can still picture the bathroom door. I can still hear the whistling on the other side. I can still remember opening it and seeing an empty hallway. Then hearing it again. Then hearing the bang. Then swinging the door open so quickly that there should have been no possible way for anyone to disappear. Then the sound of small feet running down the hall. Then the sound of the front door opening. Then the deadlock still in place. I sat outside in my underwear until my dad got home because I could not bring myself to stay inside. He laughed. I cried. And years later, I still do not have a simple explanation for what happened in that house. I was born after my grandfather had already been dead for a long time, so I never got the chance to know him. By the time I came into the family, my grandmother's house already had its own history, its own rules, and its own feeling that had nothing to do with me. One of my uncles was living there with two of his children, a son and a daughter. They were both older than I was. My cousin, the boy, was around 6 years older than me, and his sister was around 2 years older. Their mother had passed away only a few months before I was born. I did not understand all of that when I was little. I only understood that my cousins lived at Grandma's house, that their dad lived there too, and that the adults sometimes got quiet when certain subjects came up. As a child, you notice those things even when nobody explains them directly. You notice when a room changes after someone says a name. You notice when adults exchange looks. You notice when people suddenly stop talking because a kid has walked into the room. But I did not know much about my cousin's mother at the time. I only knew she had been gone for as long as I could remember. What I did know was that my grandmother's house had always felt strange, not in an obvious, dramatic way. It was not the kind of house that looked haunted from the outside. It was a normal old country house. The kind with rooms that had been used by several generations of the same family. It had furniture that had been there longer than I had been alive, old framed pictures on the walls, cabinets filled with things nobody was allowed to touch, and a smell that always seemed to be a mixture of wood, dust, old fabric, furniture polish, and whatever food my grandmother had cooked earlier that day. The house did not feel dangerous. It just felt old. Old enough that every room seemed to have something it remembered. When you are a kid, you do not think about a house as a place where other people have spent their lives. You only see it as Grandma's house, where relatives come over, where food gets made, where birthdays happen, where people sit in the kitchen and talk for hours. But when I look back, I think I could feel the age of that place, even then. The floors creaked in certain spots. The doors closed differently, depending on the weather. The hallway lights never seemed bright enough at night, and there were rooms in that house that felt like they belonged to the adults, not us. The biggest example was the parlor. The parlor was one of those rooms that every kid in the family knew not to treat like a normal room. We were not allowed to play in there. We were not allowed to run through it. We were not allowed to bring drinks into it. We were not allowed to sit on certain furniture, touch the decorations, or go in there just because we were bored. Grandma told us the reason was simple. It was where she kept her good furniture. That was true. The parlor had the nicer couches, the nicer chairs, the old wooden tables, the lamps that always seemed too delicate, and the antiques that nobody had a full explanation for. There were little objects placed carefully on shelves, cabinets, and tabletops. Things made of glass, things made of porcelain, framed pictures that looked old enough to have been there before any of us were born. It was the room where people sat during holidays. It was the room where older relatives gathered when they wanted to talk. It was the room where visitors were taken when Grandma wanted the house to look respectable. It was also the room where the staircase to the second floor was. That staircase was part of why the parlor always felt different. The rest of the house was familiar. There were rooms we could move through without thinking about it. The kitchen was loud and warm. The den was where people relaxed. Bedrooms were bedrooms. The backyard was the backyard. But the parlor was quiet. Even when people were in it, It never felt fully alive in the same way the kitchen did. The staircase rose from one side of the room, leading up to the second floor. The second floor itself was small. There were only 2 rooms up there, and one of them was the gift room. Everybody knew about the gift room. It was where Grandma kept all the Christmas gifts she bought throughout the year. She was the kind of person who planned ahead. She would see something in February and think, that would be good for so-and-so at Christmas. Then she would buy it, take it home, and hide it upstairs. By the time Christmas came around, she had a whole collection of presents waiting. She kept them in the gift room until it was time to wrap everything. Every kid in the family knew that. We all knew there were toys up there. We knew there were boxes. We knew there were bags with our names probably written somewhere on them. We knew there might be something in that room that we were going to get months later. And because we were kids, that made the gift room feel like the most important room in the house. It was impossible not to think about it. Every time Christmas got closer, every kid who came through Grandma's house would look toward the stairs. Someone would ask what was upstairs. Someone would say they wanted to check. Someone would dare someone else to sneak up and look. But we were never allowed in there. Not ever. Grandma made that rule very clear. Everybody knew it was not worth testing her. This was not one of those vague adult rules where they say, please don't go in there, and then forget about it 5 minutes later. This was a serious rule. The kind where you got warned once, and that warning was enough. If you went upstairs without permission, especially if you went into the gift room, you were going to get in trouble. Real trouble. The kind of trouble kids from country families knew better than to take lightly. We all had our own words for it, but everyone understood what it meant. You did not go into that room unless Grandma told you to. You did not touch anything upstairs. You did not try to peek behind boxes. You did not sneak up there just to see what gifts she had bought. If you did, you were going to regret it. That rule alone made the gift room feel mysterious. The more forbidden something is, the more children build stories around it. We would imagine piles of presents stacked from floor to ceiling. We would imagine that the room was full of toys, wrapped boxes, stuffed animals, clothes, games, and things nobody had even seen in stores yet. We would try to guess whether Grandma had bought something for us already. But there was another feeling around the gift room, too. A quieter feeling. The room was upstairs, away from everyone else. You could only reach it by going through the parlor and up that staircase. And because the parlor itself was off limits to us most of the time, the upstairs felt even farther away. It was like a separate part of the house, a place where you could not just wander, a place adults went, but kids did not. Even when I was young, I remember looking up the staircase and feeling like it was darker than it should have been. The upstairs landing was never bright. Even during the day, the light from below did not reach it very well. There was always a shadow around the top of the stairs, a place where the hallway seemed to disappear before you could really see the rooms. Sometimes you could hear something upstairs, a small creak, a soft shift of wood, the sound of a door moving slightly. But old houses make noise. Everyone knows that. Wood expands and contracts. Pipes make sounds. Floors creak under their own weight. A house that has been standing for decades has its own way of settling. Still, there were moments when those noises seemed too deliberate, like someone walking slowly from one room to another, like someone standing at the top of the stairs, like a door opening and closing when nobody had gone upstairs. I do not remember anyone saying the house was haunted. Not openly. Adults did not like to say things like that around kids. They would dismiss a noise as the house settling, or the wind or something loose in the attic. They would give you a look that told you not to keep asking. But there was always something about the parlor that made people lower their voices. Maybe it was because it held so many old things. Maybe it was because it had been my grandfather's house, too, and he had been gone for so long that nobody wanted to talk about him much. Maybe it was because my cousin's mother had died, and the family had spent years carrying grief around in quiet ways. Or maybe it was simply an old house with old furniture and a staircase that led to rooms children were forbidden to enter. Whatever the reason, the parlor made me uncomfortable. I did not want to be alone in it. The room felt different from the rest of the house, especially after dark. During the day, sunlight came through the windows and hit the furniture in thin lines. You could see dust floating in the air. You could see the old pictures on the walls. You could see the shape of the staircase and the dark line where the stairs went up. At night, the room changed. The furniture became shadows. The tall back chairs looked like people sitting in the dark. The old framed photographs seemed to watch from the walls. The staircase became a black shape, leading upward into a part of the house where nobody wanted us to go. I remember hurrying past the parlor sometimes. Not running, because running was not allowed in there, but moving quickly enough that I did not have to look toward the stairs. The older kids would make jokes about it. They would dare each other to go halfway up the staircase. They would stand at the bottom and whisper about what might be in the gift room. Someone would say they heard something upstairs. Someone else would say it was just the house. Then someone would laugh too loudly, and everyone would suddenly act like it was not a big deal. But it always was a big deal, because nobody actually went up there. Not without permission. Even the older cousins, who were old enough to be braver and smarter than the rest of us, seemed to understand that some rules in Grandma's house were not worth breaking. The gift room had a strange reputation in the family. Not because anyone had seen anything terrible there, not that I knew of. It was just one of those rooms that everyone talked about without talking about it. You knew it existed. You knew it was full of Christmas gifts. You knew Grandma spent time up there. You knew the room was normally shut. And you knew nobody wanted you opening that door. The more I think about it now, the more I realize how much grief might have been inside that house. My grandfather had been dead long before I was born. My cousins had lost their mother when they were still young. My uncle was living with his children at Grandma's place. And Grandma had this house full of old furniture, old photographs, old memories, and a secret room full of gifts she bought all year long for the people she loved. Maybe the house felt creepy because there was sadness in it. Maybe kids do not understand sadness directly, but they feel it anyway. They feel it in the way adults become quiet. They feel it in the rooms no one wants them touching. They feel it in the pictures that nobody explains. They feel it in the way a staircase can seem darker than the rest of a house. That might have been all it was. But even now, I remember the parlor. I remember its silence. I remember the old furniture that nobody was allowed to touch. I remember the antique decorations sitting in places where they had probably sat for decades. And I remember that staircase leading up to the second floor. The gift room was supposed to be full of Christmas presents. That was the official reason nobody could go in there. And maybe that was the only reason. Maybe there was nothing strange upstairs at all. Maybe every strange feeling came from being a kid in an old house with a forbidden room and a family full of stories nobody fully explained. But the parlor always felt wrong to me. Not evil, not dangerous, just heavy. Like the room was holding something. Like it remembered people who had been there before us. Like if you stood at the bottom of the staircase long enough, you might hear something move above you. And the worst part was that nobody would let you go upstairs to find out what it was. When I was about 7 or 8 years old, I got home from school one afternoon and decided it would be a great idea to do the exact thing I was never supposed to do. At my grandmother's house, there were certain rules every kid in the family knew by heart. We were not supposed to play in the parlor, and we were definitely not supposed to mess around anywhere near the staircase that led up to the second floor and the gift room. My grandmother always said the parlor was off limits because that was where her good furniture was. She had nice chairs in there, old antiques, delicate decorations, framed pictures, and all the things adults say children will break if they so much as breathe in the wrong direction. So naturally, because I was a child and children are experts at getting drawn to forbidden places, I decided that was the perfect room to take my action figures and play. It was after school, and the house had that quiet feeling it always had in the late afternoon before everyone got home. My grandmother was there, of course. She was almost always there. But the rest of the house felt still. I remember the air in that house always seeming a little different from other houses. It had a smell that was hard to explain, something like old wood, furniture polish, a little dust, and whatever my grandmother had cooked earlier in the day. The place was not dirty by any means. It was just old, and old houses have a smell that settles into every wall and piece of furniture. I snuck into the parlor with my action figures, fully aware that if I got caught, I was going to be in trouble. Not a little slap on the wrist kind of trouble either. At that age, I knew exactly what kind of trouble. My grandmother was not one of those adults who gave empty warnings. If she said not to go in there, she meant it. That should have been enough to keep me out. But being 7 or 8 years old means thinking only about what sounds fun in the next 5 minutes, not what happens after you get caught. The parlor always felt different from the rest of the house. It was quieter. The furniture looked more serious somehow, like it belonged to grown-ups in another time. The chairs were stiff-looking, the lamps were placed neatly where they belonged, and the room had a certain order to it that made you feel like you should not touch anything. Even as a kid, I could feel that it was not a room meant for play. But I still sat down on the floor, spread out my action figures, and started doing what kids do. In my mind, I was somewhere else entirely. The room disappeared, and all I cared about was whatever battle or adventure I had made up. I have no idea how long I had been sitting there. Maybe it was only a few minutes. Maybe longer. Time moves differently when you are a child and lost in your own little world. I remember being completely focused on my toys when suddenly, out of nowhere, the door that connected the hallway to the parlor slammed shut. It was not a gentle swing. It was not a creak. It was not the sound of a draft moving the door slowly. It slammed. Loud, hard, the kind of slam that shakes the air around you and makes your whole body jump before your mind has time to understand what just happened. I remember jerking up so fast, I nearly dropped everything. My heart instantly started pounding. For a second, I just stared at the door because it had startled me so badly. Then, like any scared kid, I ran straight to it. I grabbed the handle and tried to open it. The handle would not turn. That is one of the details that has stayed with me all these years, because at the time I had no idea that the door did not even have a lock. I just knew I was twisting the handle, and it was not moving. At 7 or 8 years old, I did not stop and think, this makes no sense, because this door has no lock. I just thought the door was stuck, and I was trapped. That was the moment the real fear started. At first, when the door slammed, I was only startled. But when I could not open it, that sudden shock turned into panic. I remember pulling on the handle harder, twisting it again and again, and feeling my chest get tighter every second. The room that had already felt off limits and a little creepy now felt completely wrong. I was no longer a kid sneaking in to play with action figures. I was a kid stuck in a forbidden room, alone. with no obvious way out. I do not know whether I called out right away or whether I was too scared at first. I do know that my next thought was the other door. On the opposite side of the parlor, near the staircase, there was a door that led out to the porch. In my panicked little mind, that became my escape. I remember letting go of the first door and running across the room as fast as I could, not even thinking about my toys anymore. I just needed out. I grabbed that second door and tried to open it. It would not budge either, not even a little. That was when it really hit me that something was wrong in a way I could not explain. One stuck door might be a bad handle or a strange accident. Two doors not opening, one after the other, in the same exact moment, while I was alone in the room. At that age, I did not have words for what I was feeling, but looking back, it was pure, helpless fear. I had that horrible, trapped feeling, like the room had closed around me. I was breathing hard by then. I remember starting to cry before I even saw anything else, just from how scared I already was. I turned around in that room, probably thinking I would make another run at the first door or scream for my grandmother. And for reasons I still cannot explain, my eyes went to the top of the staircase. That staircase led up to the second floor, where the gift room was. It was already a place that had a strange feeling around it. All the kids knew about that staircase. All of us knew what was upstairs. We knew the gift room was up there. We knew we were not supposed to be up there. We knew the whole area felt different from the rest of the house. Even before anything happened, that staircase had always made me uneasy. But I never expected to see what I saw that day. Standing at the top of the stairs was a person. That is still the word that feels most accurate, even though what I saw did not look like any normal person. It was shaped like a person. It was standing still, looking down at me. It wore a white dress. The dress is one of the clearest details in my memory. It was pale and plain, and it made the figure stand out against the darker area at the top of the stairs. Then there was the face. I have spent years trying to describe that face properly, and the best comparison I can make is that it looked like Ghostface from Scream, though I would not have made that comparison at 7 or 8 years old. Looking back now, that is what it reminds me of. The skin looked unnaturally white, pale in a way that did not look human. The eyes looked black. Not just dark, but black. The mouth looked black too, like a dark hollow shape in the middle of that pale face. And it had long black hair. It was just standing there, not moving, not speaking, not coming down the stairs, just standing at the top, looking at me. I cannot even properly explain what fear felt like in that moment. Everything inside me dropped. My stomach, my chest, my legs, all of it. It was the most complete and overwhelming fear I have ever felt in my life. Before that moment, I had been panicking because I thought I was trapped. The second I saw that figure, every bit of that panic exploded into full terror. I screamed. I do not mean I yelled a little or cried for help. I screamed louder than I ever had before, and honestly, louder than I ever have since. It was the kind of scream that comes from pure instinct. I was crying at the same time, completely beside myself, and I turned and ran back toward the first door. At that point, I did not care whether it opened or not. I just wanted away from the staircase, away from that thing standing at the top of it, away from the whole room. I remember running to the door and getting ready to pound on it, desperate for my grandmother to hear me, even though in my mind I was sure I had already been trapped for far too long. But before I could do much of anything, the door flew open. My grandmother yanked it open from the other side. I nearly ran straight into her. She looked startled and upset, the way any adult would if they suddenly heard a child screaming and crying like they were being murdered. She was asking me what was wrong, what happened. if I had hurt myself, if I had fallen, if something had hit me. I was sobbing so hard I am not even sure my first words made sense. I remember trying to tell her about the doors, about being trapped, about something at the top of the stairs. My grandmother told me she had been in the kitchen the whole time. That part stuck with me, too. She said she had not heard a door slam at all. The only reason she got up and came to the parlor was because she heard me screaming and crying. According to her, there had been no loud slam, no reason for her to come check, nothing unusual at all until I started screaming at the top of my lungs. That made no sense to me then, and it still makes no sense to me now. I know what I heard. That door slammed shut. It was loud enough to make me jump out of my skin. Then the porch door would not open either. Whether the handles were actually stuck or whether fear made me fumble them, I cannot say for sure now, but in that moment they would not open for me. And then I saw that figure upstairs. To hear my grandmother calmly say she had heard no door slam only made the whole thing stranger. Of course, she did not believe what I told her. Or if she did, she definitely did not show it. She told me I had a wild imagination and that I needed to stop watching scary movies. That was the adult answer. She said I had gotten myself worked up, probably because I knew I was in a room I was not supposed to be in. She talked to me the way adults talk when they want to shut down a child's fear without feeding into it. She was firm, practical, and not particularly interested in hearing that I had seen some ghostly figure on the staircase. Then she added one more detail that made the whole thing even worse. She said nobody else had gotten home yet. At first, that may not sound like much, but as a kid, it mattered. Somewhere in the back of my mind, there had still been a tiny hope that maybe someone else had come home without me knowing. Maybe an older cousin. Maybe my uncle. Maybe some other adult. Maybe somebody had closed the door or been upstairs and I had only misunderstood what I saw. But my grandmother made it clear no one else was home. That meant, according to her, I had been alone in the parlor, alone with two doors that would not open, alone when I looked up and saw a woman, or something shaped like a woman, in a white dress standing at the top of the staircase, after she got me calmed down a little. She probably sent me out of the parlor and gave me a warning about staying out of there, but I honestly do not remember much of the next part. I think my mind was still stuck on what I had seen. I remember feeling embarrassed because adults always make you feel silly when they say you imagined something. But I also remember knowing deep down that I had not imagined the fear. Whether someone believes in ghosts or not, fear like that leaves a mark. It gets burned into your memory. For a long time after that, I wanted nothing to do with that room by myself. The parlor had already felt strange before, but after that day, it became worse. I did not want to walk through it alone if I could help it. I definitely did not want to look at the staircase. I would pass by the room and immediately think of that white face, those black eyes, that black mouth, and the way it just stood there, watching me. I hated the idea of the gift room even more after that. Before, it was just a forbidden room upstairs where Christmas presents were hidden. After that, the whole second floor felt wrong. And even now, years later, what stays with me most is not just the figure itself, but the way the whole event unfolded. The parlor door slamming shut, the handle not turning, the porch door refusing to move, the sudden realization that I was trapped. Then, that awful, almost unnatural feeling that made me turn and look up the staircase at exactly the wrong moment. People have tried to explain experiences like that in different ways. Some will say I was a child in an old house, somewhere I knew I was not supposed to be, and my mind got carried away. Some will say the fear of getting caught made me panic and imagine the rest. Some will say old houses make strange noises, old doors stick, and a child's imagination can turn shadows into something terrifying. And maybe there is some truth in that. I was a kid. It was an old house. I was in a forbidden room. I was already nervous on some level just from being there. But I know what I saw. Or at least, I know what I believe I saw. I know that the image of that figure has stayed with me far too clearly for it to feel like some random shadow. I know the fear I felt was real. I know I had never screamed like that before, and I have not screamed like that since. I know I ran for that door like my life depended on it. And I know my grandmother's response, instead of comforting me, somehow made it all worse. Because if she really was in the kitchen the whole time and really heard no door slam, then whatever happened in that room happened to me alone. That thought bothered me more than anything else. It meant no one else heard it. No one else saw it. No one else could confirm it. And yet, it happened. I still think about that day more often than I probably should. It was such a simple thing on paper. A child breaks the rules, sneaks into a room he is not allowed in, gets scared, and runs out crying. That is the easy version. But that is not what it felt like from the inside. From the inside, it felt like I stepped into the wrong place at the wrong time and saw something I was never meant to see. And to this day, when I picture that house, I do not think first about the kitchen or the yard or family gatherings. I think about the parlor. I think about the good furniture and the antiques. I think about the staircase leading to the gift room. I think about a quiet afternoon after school. And I think about a figure in a white dress standing at the top of the stairs, staring down at a terrified little kid who never forgot her face. Look, if you're still watching, you already know what this channel is. No jump scares, no fake drama, just real stories about real people who survived things most of us can't even imagine. And that's scarier than any movie could ever be. If you want more of this raw, unfiltered truth, told the way it deserves to be told, subscribe to Lacuna Noir. We're not here to waste your time. We're here to tell the stories that actually matter. Thanks for listening. Now go get some sleep, if you can.